Hi, everyone. Welcome to our March 2025 session, RedCap Tips and Tricks. This month, we're looking at an interesting use case. This is the CalcText email alerts trick. So what our use case looks like here is sometimes our workflows necessitate sending emails to different team members based on various conditions. So if I hop into my demo project, there might be a situation where we need to choose which team member to send an email to. Maybe it's the right coordinator, the right physician, um, or maybe it's the person who works for a certain location or has a certain area of expertise. Um, and this can be accomplished using trigger logic in the alerts and notifications feature. So kind of the traditional way to do this just with alerts and notifications logic. So let's say that I want to direct an email to my staff members based on the name selections here. So I'm going to create a new alert, and this is going to be my alert to send to Peter. So in order to do this through the logic in an alert, what I need to do is I need to take my staff name field and I build an alert for each individual staff member. So I would need to build an alert for Peter, Susan, Edmund, Lucy, every individual person. And in some cases, that's not a huge deal, but a lot of the time that becomes a huge number of alerts to build and maintain. So it's a high burden at the initial build, high burden if we have workflow changes or staff turnover, at a high risk of missing something or making a mistake, especially if we have to make updates after the project has already gone into production. So the trick that we're doing today kind of relies on two different tools. So the first tool is that when we're building an alert, we can choose to send in this email too. This doesn't have any fields built yet that work that way, but any field in REDCap that is email validated can be fed into an alert. So I'm just going to create this one real quick. So staff email, and we're going to use, so that's the validation, right? This is REDCap checking that this is formatted as an email so that it knows it can use this to send emails. So I've got that email field built. And if I go back into alerts and notifications, I go to set up an alert. So I can send to this staff email field. I can't do this with any other field type though. So multiple choice, checkbox, etc. I can't use them directly as a send to option. In order to be able to send based on the data that's in a REDCap farm, my email ultimately has to end up in a validated email text box. However, there is a very cool trick that we can do to conditionally fill a text box, and that's called the CalcText action tag. So CalcText lets you basically fill a field based on certain conditions. So it's formatted as an if then else. You'll take at CalcText, open a set of parentheses, if open a set of parentheses. You indicate your condition, the value to fill if the condition is true, and the value to fill if the condition is false. And we're going to look at a nested CalcText action tag in a minute. But essentially, each new if statement occupies the else spot of the previous statement. So it would go sequentially and check the first condition. First condition isn't true, we go check the second condition, things like that. We can contain ands and ors, so we could say, if we have option 1, 2, or 3 checked, then we fill this value. All right, if we have option 4 or 5 checked, we fill this value. So they can become quite complicated and accommodate a lot of different situations. So what we're going to ultimately do in this trick is we're going to fill our validated email field using conditions in the CalcText action tag. And then instead of having to build a separate alert for each set of conditions, that conditional logic is now being handled by the calc text action tag. So I only need to build my alert with that one validated email field. So we're just going to look real quick at the anatomy of an email address, make sure we're all on the same page as far as what an email structure is, what I'm talking about when I say things like username and domain. So this is my Jefferson email address, and this is the structure that REDCap is looking for when it is validating an email field. So it's looking to see that you have a username of some kind, you have the @ symbol, and then you have a domain. So that domain is something.edu, something.com, something.net, something.org. That's your domain. So this is the format that those email fields are checking for. Those email fields cannot verify for you that this is a valid email address. That is something you need to check for yourself. It's also very convenient in that we can use fake email addresses for our building and testing and then not have to spam real people's email boxes. But it checks for this format. So let's look. I'm going to break down a nested calc text function real quick. So this is a calc text function of the style that we would use to fill an email field based on the selection of a multiple choice field. So our first calc text statement, so we initiate that calc text, open parentheses, if open parentheses. Then we have our conditions. So that's that personnel equals 1. So that's saying if I have selected option 1 for a field called personnel, that's my first condition. So REDCap is going to check to see whether that's true. So if it turns out that that's true, that I have selected option 1 for my personnel field, then we go on to the area highlighted in green. That's the value that's going to be put into my text field if that condition is true. So if personnel equals 1, then we put in bilbo.baggins@tolkien.edu. And then everything in pink is our else. So it goes if, then, else. So if my condition is true, I put in Bilbo Baggins. If personnel does not equal 1, then I go on to check everything else. So we go on to our second statement. Let's say that personnel did not equal 1. So REDCap is now going to check. Okay, so we finished evaluating our first statement. We're already inside of the calc text, so we don't need to call the calc text action tag again. We just start a new if statement. So that's that if and open parentheses right there. And we put our second condition. So, okay, personnel didn't equal 1. Now we're going to check if personnel equals 2. And if personnel equals 2, then we fill in frodo.baggins@tolkien.edu. And similarly, what's in pink is now our else from the point of view of the second if statement. So if we've checked that personnel equals 2, it doesn't equal 2, then we go on to check that next statement. And so personnel didn't equal 1. We went on to check if personnel equaled 2. Personnel didn't equal 2. Now we go on to check if personnel equals 3. So if personnel equals 3, then we're going to fill in sam.gamgee@tolkien.edu. If personnel doesn't equal 3, so we've already checked if it equals 1, it didn't equal 1. Already checked if it didn't equals 2, it didn't equal 2. Already checked if it equaled 3, didn't equal 3. Then we have our final else condition. So that's that set of empty quotes right there. And what that means is leave the field blank. So if none of the options that I care about have been selected, when I'm doing this trick, I leave that field blank if none of the options that I'm calculating based on have been selected. And that's the other valuable thing about this trick is that if I have left my email field blank, REDCap just ignores it when sending the alert. So this allows me to conditionally send things and to account for the fact that sometimes none of these people need to get an email. So, and then the last step is we need to make sure that we close all of our parentheses. And REDCap, when you are doing action tags, does highlight in red which parentheses you're closing. So it makes it a little easier to check that you have in fact closed all of your parentheses. But that's what we mean by nesting, is that each of these if statements lives inside of the other if statement. So I close all of my parentheses at the end. That's closing up my nest. So let's look at the first method of how we're going to do this trick. So this is working from a multiple choice field, and we're going into a single email field. So we want to build a multiple choice field that determines who should receive this email. So that might be the person's name, it might be a location, it might be the area of support we need. And then just as we did on that first multiple choice by person form, so we've created our email field that's validated as a text box. And so now what we're going to do, we're going to use one of these nested calc text action tags, just like the one we went over, and cycle through all of our options for that personnel field, that determining field, and fill in the different username at domain email addresses. So this staff email field, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to open up the action tags editor, start my calc text statement, make sure I spell it correctly. Calc text if, I forgot my field name, staff name, there we go. Okay, calc text if staff name equals 1, then we want to fill in peter@pevensey.com. All right, so there's my if, there's my then. And then for my else, I go on to my next if statement. So if staff name equals 2, then we want Susan's email. So susan@pevensey.com. If staff name equals 3, then we want Edmund at pevensey.com. And then finally, if staff name equals 4, Lucy at pevensey.com. All right. And then we have another comma. We have our empty quotation marks to say if none of these are selected, we leave the field blank. And then you can see it's highlighting those parentheses in red as I go and close them all out. It is possible to write all of this, just going ahead through lines. You don't have to use enter to separate them. However, I find it much easier to read and to let someone else read if I'm using those new lines, using that white space to make it more human readable. So we're going to update and close editor. And then we will go to our alerts and notifications. So I'm going to do, this is going to be alert by person. And now instead of having to do logic in my alert, I can just say when we've saved that multiple choice by person form, we trip this alert. And who are we sending it to? We're sending it to whoever's email has been calc text into that email form. I'm just going to put test and test there so that I can save this alert. All right, so we're going to come in here and create a new record. So you can see here, whichever person I select, their email ends up in that box. So we're going to say that this is going to Edmund, and we're going to save it. And then this is a fake email address, so I'm not going to get a ping into my inbox or anything. But if I go to view the notification log, and I view notification, I can see that this came from my email to Edmund Pevensey. And so that's how that trick works. So Sometimes it makes sense to select by person, right? If you are doing this within a team, you know who everyone should see, who should get each of these emails. That makes sense to do. But there are other times when the information that the person entering the form is going to have doesn't include, knowing the inner workings of who has what area of expertise. So in this case, we're going by location. And so now I'm going to use those locations to know which person I'm going to direct this email to. So I'm just going to really quickly grab a snip of my options here so that I remember what I'm coding. Okay. And then come on over here. All right. So those are my options. So now I'm going to call this field location email. And this is going to be a text box field. It's going to be validated as an email field. And my calc texts are going to have the same structure. But it's just a slightly different thought process of people select this option, this location, and then I translate that location into an email address. So at calc text, if location equals 1, we want to send that to aslan@narnia.com. If location equals 2, then we want to send that to Prince Core at Narnia.com. If location equals 3, then we're sending that to Jadis. And I can use the same email for multiple conditions, but a lot of the time it makes sense to keep those conditions on separate lines because I could have a change of staff at some point. So options 3 and 4, both Charn and the Lone Islands, are going to go to Jadis right now. But that could change down the road, right? Jadis, is currently doing double duty at 2 sites, but maybe down the road, I'm able to expand my team and I have someone else take over for her. So I want to keep those 2 separated because they're not inherently tied together. They could become things that are overseen by different people. So I want to build this field with the thought process that I might need to update it over time. So I want to put those on separate rows. I want to have separate values associated with them so that if my staffing configuration changes, those sites can be updated individually and I don't have to untangle them after the fact. All right. So I'm going to save this. And then we'll go set up an alert for our location. So this is going to be alert by location. And again, we don't have to make fancy logic in our alert. The logic is already being accomplished by our calc text field. So we just say multiple choice by location is saved. Then I send it to the location email, test, test. All right, I create my alert. I go into my record status dashboard. And you can see, once again, whichever one I select, that causes the right email to be filled. If I were building this as most of the time, as you build these, you'll ultimately end up using the @hidden action tag to hide this email address. But during testing, you really want to keep it unhidden so that you can see what's happening with it. All right. So we're going to save this. And once again, I can go to alerts and notifications, pull up my notification log for this alert. And I can see that my alert sent to Reepicheap at Narnia.com. So that's how it works with a multiple choice field. Another possibility is that we might have multiple people who could need to be copied on an email, and we need to figure out how to add all of those different email addresses in. And this is where this trick becomes incredibly valuable. Because let's think about it for a minute. If I had 4 different people who could need to be included on alert, but sometimes would and sometimes wouldn't, right? I would have to build a separate alert with individualized logic for every potential combination of people who need copied on an email. But using this calc text trick, I can get around that and I can make it so much easier on myself. So I'm going to build multiple email fields, but ultimately they're all going in one alert. And if one of them happens to be blank, cool, that person's not getting copied. If their email is filled out, cool, that person gets copied. So I'm going to start building my text boxes. So this is going to be CC email 1. It's going to be validated as an email. And then I'm just going to copy it a few times. So I need 1 email box for every person on my checklist. So I've got 4 email boxes now, and that is the correct number of email boxes. All right. So, and then instead of nesting all of my calc text statements together, I actually am only doing one if then else consideration for each field. So this is my first field. So I'm going to say if CC options option 1 is checked, that's what I just wrote, that this is the option code. This is saying that it is checked. If I wanted to say it's not checked, I would type a 0. All right, comma space. If it's checked, we want to put in Huddleglum Narnia.com. Otherwise, we leave it blank. So what I'm going to do real quick, I'm ultimately going to copy and paste the logic and just switch out the option codes and emails. But before I do that, I want to check real quick that my logic is working. Yep. Yeah. There we go. I was on the wrong form. Okay. So my logic is working for my first field. Cool. That means I can copy and paste and save myself some effort. The trick is that if I have made a mistake in my equation, like let's say I misspelled calc text or I forgot to close a bracket or a parenthesis, I do that all the time. REDCap is going to show me that there's an error in one of my calculations on the form, but it's not going to tell me which one or what the error is. So as I write new equations, I just go in and test them real quick. And that makes my life drastically easier. It makes troubleshooting so much easier. Who was option 3? Option 3 is Bree. Okay. So if option 3 is checked, so we change the 3 because that's our option code. We do not change 1 because 1 is saying is checked. That becomes Bree at Narnia.com. And then we'll do Glimfeathers. There we go, Glimfeather. Okay. So now, when I come in here, you see I've got these text boxes and people's emails only get filled into them if they are checked in my selection checkbox here. So the way that I capture that into my alert, let's say, for the sake of this project, normally, if I have multiple people feeding into one email, I would put them all in the same form. I would not separate them. But in this case, I've built it this way for demo purposes. So, oops, actually, it's not how I want to do it. I don't want to put them in this box. So this is the email to box. This is the main recipient, but I can hit show more options, and that grants me CC, BCC, and the person to send email failures to. So I can make my alerts more granular this way. So I'm going to add all of my CC options to the CC box. And this is for my multiple choice by location form. So I saved that. So now I'm going to create a new test record. So first I'll fill out checkbox CCs because I need that information. So we're sending to Puddleglum, Trumpkin, and Glimfeather. They all need to be copied on this. And I'm doing this first because saving the location form is my alert trigger. And we're going to send this to our Narnia contact, which is Aslan, and we will save the form. So now when I go to look at this alert, I go to its logging. We can see the one I just sent for record 5. It sends to Aslan, but it also copies the people whose names got checked. So I sent it to Puddleglum, Trumpkin, and Glimfeather as well, but notice it didn't send to Bree. It sent, even though his field is empty, it just ignored the empty field. So this allows me to, with one alert, copy endless combinations of users, or endless combinations of people. They don't have to be REDCap users on an email. So some considerations that I think about as I'm building these. What information does the person who is completing the form have? So we talked about that with the different multiple choice fields, right? If you're doing something within a team, like let's say you're building alerts on a study, there's a good chance that people know, which coordinator does this patient see, which physician do they see? So you can make a name-based field. But for operational support projects, the people who are seeking assistance may not know your internal workflows and areas of expertise, your division of labor. So you want to build your selection field based on information they know. Like, what do they need help with? What location do they work at? You want to use that information to direct their request to the right person. There's also, what data do you need to track over the life of the project? Do I need to know the locations that people are asking for help at, the areas of expertise they're asking for help at? Do I need to know which people are involved? That's going to be different for every project. And that's going to determine, in part, what you need to build as a multiple choice field and what can just be captured in those calc texts. So the other thing is that as a project goes on, you might have staffing changes. Things can change. So if data about individual staff members is relevant, you want to make sure that you preserve all your staff options. So let's say I come in here to my designer. Let's say Peter and Susan are leaving us, and we're getting joined by Eustace instead. So I will add Eustace as a new and separate option. I won't overwrite anything because I want to hold on to all my data about Peter and Susan. I'm just going to add Eustace as option 5. And then I will use an action tag called hide choice right here. And that lets me make a list of options that I don't want people to be able to select anymore, but I want to hold on to the data associated with them. So I'm going to say hide choice 1 and 2. And then I need to add Eustace's email into my calc text calculation. So I'm going to leave those lines about Peter and Susan untouched. I'm not going to do anything with those. I'm going to come in here right after Lucy. I'm going to say staff name equals 5. And that, if people select option 5, that's when I want to put in Eustace at scrub.com. And then I need to make sure that I add another parenthesis to close this out, right? Because I introduced another if statement. I need more parentheses. And so if I go to create a new record, you can see here, my options are now Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace. So I don't see Peter and Susan anymore, but their data is still preserved. So now let's think about the situation where we're going by location, because that could be different. So this might be a situation where I don't need to keep track of who my individual staff members are, where I'm only tracking the locations. That sometimes happens in our operational projects, right? Where it's not important to know, we're not tracking who did something, we're tracking which location was involved. And so for situations like that, it might be okay to say, okay, Jadis has gotten replaced at the Lone Islands. It's Caspian now. So I'm just changing my calc text function and replacing Jadis's email with Caspian's. Now, if I go back into a form where I had selected the Lone Islands, it would replace Jadis's email with Caspian's now. It would rerun that calculation. So that is a potential overwrite. But again, for some projects that matters, for some projects it doesn't. So we really need to think about what data we're tracking and what we need to hold on to. The email logs are always going to show who got a specific email from a specific record at a specific time. So that will not be altered by me changing my calc text. So technically, I would still have documentation that an old Lone Islands request got handled by Jadis and we switched over to Caspian at this point in time. But again, if this is data that I need to track over the long term, I need to track my staff members, I wouldn't do this. I only do this if I'm tracking locations or areas of expertise instead of staff members. And if I have new emails or a staff turnover with my checkbox option, it's kind of similar. So let's say we're saying goodbye to Trumpkin. So I'm going to do my hide choice action tag again. We're going to hide option 2. So hide choice equals 2. And now we're going to stop seeing Trumpkin's email. But we're adding a new team member. And this is going to be Nickabrick. So then I need to create a new CC email for Nickabrick. So he's got his own field now. His is CC email 5. So option 5 is checked. Get Nickabrick at Narnia.com. And then the other thing I need to do, because I added a new email field, is I need to come back into my alerts and I need to add that new email field in so that along with everyone else who was already getting copied on these emails, if their email was filled out by the calc text, Nickabrick is included too. So I have another project where I've actually got a fairly complicated workflow. But when we break it down, it is just this same trick. And I'm able to do a very complicated workflow using this trick. So this is a time off request process that I've copied as a demo project. So what the people filling out this time off request would see, they would see this form. So I'm going to fill this out as myself. And then there are many options that direct who needs to approve this person's time off. So for some people, they're through the supportive oncology workflow. If they're not from the supportive oncology workflow, then it gets directed based on their primary site. So they could be from all these different primary sites. Einstein has a couple different sites that have different people. Center City has some different groups under it. They might have other regions that they sometimes practice at that need to be notified. There are quite a few subgroups under Center City. And all of those necessitate different people at certain steps in the process. But this is what my end users will see. All right, so I've got this person's request filled out, filling it out as me. So I'm saying I'm not a supportive oncology provider, so I go through the site-based workflow. My primary region is Center City. I'm part of the solid tumor division, and I am in the head and neck disease site. But then I also practice some at Methodist Northeast in New Jersey. So they also, at the final step, need to be notified of this. So here I have my workflow spreadsheet for who gets notified of this. And this is all on the back end. The person filling out a request only sees all of this stuff. They see none of the back end here. So, okay, Center City solid tumor disease. And I'm part of head and neck, right? Yes, head and neck. Okay. So my initial approval goes through Mary and we CC Gandalf on it. Final approval goes through Frodo and we CC Gandalf on it. And then I have all of these people who need to receive the final notification that I'm going to be out of the office. But so do, let's see, I said Methodist, Northeast, and New Jersey. So do, these final recipients, which are the same people, these final recipients, which are different people, and this final recipient. So all of these are different people. And so all of them need to receive that alert. So I close that survey and let's go into my alerts and notifications. We're going to look at my notification log real quick and see the one that just got sent out. So we see this one goes directly to Mary. So he's getting the initial approval request. Let me fill that out. So we say, sure, this person can go on vacation. And then we've got our alert that goes to Frodo with Gandalf CC. That's what we want. This is the final approval. And this is the big one. This is where we needed multiple groups of people copied on it. And that's what we have happening. So this final email goes out to the person who's going to be out, the person who's covering for them. That's that test 1, 2, 3. And then it goes to this whole council here, right? Elrond, Thranduil, Thorin, Celeborn, Bilbo. And then we also needed to copy Shadowfax and Butterbur, Imrahil, Rosie, Elrond, Thranduil, Thorin. It doesn't matter that they're both CC'd and sent as main people. The point is that everyone who needed to be copied on this is copied on it. And even if those staff members change down the road, I'm just going to switch out the calc text function. Everyone who's supposed to get this gets that email. So what this looks like on the back end that people aren't seeing, see how this has 81 fields? We did not see 81 fields when we were filling it out. So I broke this down and I said, okay, everybody's initial approval, because I wasn't sure if people would need to be CC'd at the initial approval step at the beginning too, and this way they're easier to update and maintain in the long term. So very much like that checkbox form that we did, if we've selected the Asplund region, then we fill in Biffer's email here. And if it's not, we leave it blank. So Biffer gets the initial approval email if this person is mainly practicing at Asplund. And if not, that field gets ignored. And here, same deal. Boffer gets copied if that physician region equals 3 for Asplund. So the center city approvals get interesting because that's where we have all those different subtypes, right? So there are several rounds of decision-making for who needs to fill out the initial approval. So let's look at that real quick. So center city, the initial approvals. So if we're doing BMT, the BMT group doesn't do the initial approval step. They go straight to final approval. If it's under heme, leukemia goes to Balin, lymphoma and myeloma go to Dory. So if heme subtype equals 1, then we choose Balin. We fill in Balin's email. If heme subtype equals 2, we put in Dory's email. If heme subtype equals 3, we put in Dory's email. And again, I separated those because those are currently the same person, but they could stop being the same person someday, right? Those could separate. So I want to make sure that we don't have to do a giant overhaul on this equation. It supports long-term maintenance. And then we've got our disease sites for if they're under the solid tumor group. So we've got Ori's for option 1. Let's see. Yeah, we've got Ori's for melanoma, Nori's for breast, Feeli's for GI, Keely's for GU, all of that. That's captured within this nested calc text statement. So if I open up this field, oops, that's the wrong one. That's the CC. That one's easy. That's just Gandalf. But you can see each line I've got a different if condition. I've got my then that I fill in. And then if I get all the way to the end and none of these have been selected, I leave it blank. So if they're not in one of the heme groups and they're not in one of the Center City solid tumor disease sites, cool, this field gets blank. None of these people get an email. So we did initial approvers for everyone who does the initial approver step. And then we've got final approval fields for all of the sites because everyone does the final approval. And again, it's the same deal. If that region is selected, cool, we send it, we put in Bomber's email, and the final approval is a little easier even at Center City. So it's just broken down by division. Who gets what email. And then our final recipients are where it gets extra interesting, because now people can need that final email if their area is selected as the main region, or if they're selected as one of the other regions that needs to be notified. So this is where I've got some OR logic in my condition. So all of this right here is my condition. So if Center City is selected for physician region, or if Center City is selected for the other regions that need to be notified, we're going to put Elron's email into this, and he will ultimately get copied on this email. And same deal with the other sites. So here's my whole condition highlighted here. So if we've selected Asplund option 3 for either physician region or for the other regions that need to be notified, we're going to put Biffer's email in here, and he's going to get that final email. So what the alerts look like. The alerts for initial approval are fairly simple, right? They just have, if we've selected this region and we have our trigger items, then we send to our initial approval people. And that makes sense. Final approval looks very similar. Right, we've got our logic, we've got our final approval person. But then those final notifications where we can end up needing to copy a whole bunch of people. All it is, we're just going through everybody in order. So we're starting with, okay, my physician who's going to be off needs this email notification, the person who put in the request, the covering physician, and everyone who's on that final recipient list for the main site gets this email. And then my CC people, I've just put in all of my final recipient options for every site as a potential CC. Almost no one is going to have everybody CC'd. It's just a matter of who they've checked off as, oh yeah, this site needs to know about this. So all of those are included as potential CCs. And if I have changes down the road, this is a project where I'm not tracking the staff who approve requests so much as I'm tracking where my providers work. That's what we actually need to know. So this is one where it is okay to make updates within the calc text function. So let's say, like we were talking about earlier, right? Dory is currently overseeing both lymphoma and myeloma, but that could change, right? So let's say that Gimli comes in and takes over melanoma, right? That's all I have to do to update this. I have to figure out, how my option is encoded and go update that particular part of the then statement. If I end up adding options, I got to make sure I close out all my parentheses, but I can make that update. So some helpful habits when you are working with this trick. Test everything. So my calc text fields ultimately end up being hidden, but I wait until I'm done with testing to hide them so that I can watch what they're doing the entire time. I can tell if I've got the wrong option triggering the wrong person. Open the form and test it every couple of fields. It's very easy to make a small error in these logics, and a single broken calculation disrupts the whole form. REDCap will just give you a notification that, hey, a calculation on this page is broken. Nothing's going to work right on this form. But it doesn't tell you which calculation has the mistake. So that's why you need to check very frequently. Problem solving is a lot more manageable if I'm checking every couple of fields instead of checking after I've built 10 fields and I don't know which one is broken. Builds with fake email addresses so that you can test the alerts without flooding anyone's real inbox, right? I built this project with Lord of the Rings characters. Before it goes live, I will switch it over to the actual staff members. But while it's in that development process, no, it's just full of Lord of the Rings fake emails. Format the calc text for readability so that's what I was talking about with putting each if statement on a new line. Makes it so much easier to read, makes it so much easier to update. After you've done all your testing, so in addition to the @hidden action tag, I also need to use the @hidden-pdf action tag. So we can make as many fields as we need because our end users aren't going to see them. But hidden hides the field in every context except downloading a PDF of the form. I need to use hidden-pdf as well so that if people download a PDF, they can still read what's going on. So all of these fields have that @hidden-pdf action tag on them. And if I didn't do that, then when somebody, went to open this this PDF that I'm having it autosave, instead of having this small PDF that makes a lot of sense, they would have all of my calc text fields. We don't want that. So @hidden-pdf is very helpful. All right, this is a bonus that didn't make it into the live presentation, but it is cool, so I do want to tack it on here. So you can also run this calc text based on the contents of a text field. So in this physician time off project, if certain people are going to be out of the office, then some leadership people need to know. So you may also want to have a situation where you copy a particular team member if a keyword appears in a case note. Kind of the obvious example is, or the obvious to me example is if you're working with depression people or a population with depression, and you want to make sure that people who endorse suicidal ideation get a call from the counselor on your team, you could have, if the source field contains the keyword, then we fill in this calc text field with that person's email. And again, just like all of those CCs we did earlier, we can add that field onto any alert, and the recipient only gets copied if the calc text conditional logic puts their email into the field. So in this project, there are a few campus keys that can necessitate that leadership be told about it. So at the very bottom, I've got these fields, chair, final recipient 1 and 2. So those are for the chair's office to know that certain people are going to be out. And the way that these calc texts look, so we're saying if we kind of go inside out here, right? So if my first condition, if either of these conditions are true, I'm going to put in Bill the Pony's email. That's what it ultimately boils down to. So what we're doing is we're using the contains special function to check, does the field physician campus key contain this string of text? So this is my campus key. I've also given it campus key XXX123 as another option. So again, we're saying if this contains that, if this field contains that information, then we fill in Bill the Pony's email. And notice that in this case, I'm closing my parentheses in a couple of different places, right? So that contains, the parentheses for contains go around that field and what we're checking for in that field. So that parenthesis stays very close and contained. The calc text parentheses For our if statement, those are still kind of strung out and around the whole statement. But that contains, I close immediately because each of these is a separate condition I'm checking, right? I'm checking to see if it contains my campus key or if it contains XXX123. And either of those will cause Bill the Pony's email to be put in. So in the example that we did earlier, I did put in my own campus key, so I did trigger that logic. And so if we go to our past notifications, we can see here that Bill the Pony and Tom Bombadil also got copied on this using that contains and calc text combination. So that's the end of our session. And again, this is something that feels very complex, definitely requires a lot of testing. Once you get used to it, it can create a lot of simplification for complex projects. And my big advice is to always just break things down gradually, think through each step of the workflow. You can build as many calc text email fields as you need. You're going to hide them from your user in the end. So it can feel overwhelming at first, but once you get used to it, there's a flow to it, and it can become very comfortable and a very useful tool. So thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.